the young, and the restless spoilers. The night was shrouded in a thick veil of terror, leaving everyone in a state of frantic fear. The air was tense with the echoes of a fierce confrontation between Martin and Alan, two brothers whose relationship had been strained to the breaking point. The night culminated in a violent struggle, ending with Martin's lifeless body sprawled on the cold, hard ground. Alan stood over his brother, breathless and horrified, the gravity of what had transpired sinking in. Martin had been consumed by rage, unable to see reason, and Alan, in a desperate bid to protect those he loved, had made the ultimate, irrevocable choice. Alan's heart pounded with regret. The realization that he had killed his brother, even in self-defense, was a weight too heavy to bear. Martin had become a danger, a ticking time bomb ready to cause untold chaos, but that knowledge did little to alleviate the crushing guilt Alan felt. As the initial shock began to fade, the practical horror of the situation set in: what to do with Martin's body. If the police discovered what had happened, Alan knew he would face imprisonment. Alan's mind raced, searching for a solution. Panic gripped him, but a desperate idea formed. He would need to hide the evidence. The body had to disappear. Alan decided to bury Martin behind the mountain, a remote area where he hoped no one would ever discover the grave. He could only pray that this grim solution would buy them time and conceal the tragedy. Meanwhile, Ashley, their beloved sister, had been hospitalized, requiring urgent medical attention. Tucker, their loyal friend, and Alan resolved to take on the gruesome task of disposing of Martin's body. Tucker understood that Alan's actions had been driven by a need to protect Ashley, and so he agreed to help, accepting the potential consequences. Under the cover of darkness, Tucker and Alan worked swiftly, their movements driven by adrenaline and fear. Martin's body was heavy with the weight of their shared history and the finality of death. As they transported him to the secluded mountainside, the night seemed to stretch on endlessly, each minute a torturous reminder of the irreversible act. Upon reaching their destination, they dug a deep grave. The sound of shovels hitting the rocky soil was deafening in the silent night, each strike a painful echo of their guilt. As they lowered Martin into the ground, Alan's hands trembled. He could hardly believe this was his life now, driven to bury his brother in secret, haunted by the specter of his own actions. Alan's heartache was compounded by his inability to focus on Ashley's recovery. The guilt gnawed at him, making it impossible to think about anything else. He was torn between his duties as a healer and his anguish as a brother who had taken a life. Tucker, sensing Alan's torment, took charge of their grim task, reassuring Alan with silent strength. As dawn approached, they completed the burial, covering the grave and scattering leaves and branches to conceal any signs of disturbance. They stood there for a moment, silent and somber, the reality of their situation sinking in. Alan knew that if the police ever discovered Martin's body, both he and Tucker would face severe consequences. Returning home, Alan's mind was a storm of regret and confusion. He couldn't shake the image of Martin's lifeless face, nor the sound of his final, desperate breaths. Tucker stayed by his side, offering silent support, but Alan felt utterly alone. The bond of brotherhood had been shattered, replaced by a chasm of guilt and sorrow. Back at the hospital, Ashley was recovering, unaware of the horrors that had unfolded. Alan watched over her, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what he had done to protect her. He wanted to be strong for her, to be the caregiver she needed, but the weight of his actions pressed down on him, threatening to crush his spirit. Days turned into weeks, and the fear of discovery loomed large. Alan and Tucker lived in a constant state of vigilance, wary of every knock at the door, every phone call. They knew that their secret was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the smallest misstep. The nights were the worst for Alan. In the darkness, his mind replayed the events of that fateful night, tormenting him with the I what-ifs and if-onlys. Sleep eluded him, replaced by a restless, haunting vigil. He had saved Ashley, but at what cost? His soul felt tainted, marked by the sin of fratricide. Tucker, ever the loyal friend, stayed close, understanding that their bond was now forged in the fire of shared guilt. He knew that Alan's remorse was a heavy burden, one that could not be easily lifted. They spoke little of that night, finding solace in silence and the simple act of being there for each other.